Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. Okay, this is Peah Chapter 8, Halacha 6. Now, before this, we were talking about the laws of Meiser Ni, and now the logical conclusion is we're going to talk about other types of charity funds that are going to be distributed to the poor, and how is that going to work? So the Mishnah reads, we do not give a poor person who is traveling from place to place less than a loaf of bread that costs a pundion, when 4 seah of wheat costs a selah. If he stays overnight, we give him provisions for night lodging. If he stays over for Shabbos, we give him food for 3 meals. Okay, so what this is trying to do is this is trying to say, okay, let's say you have a poor traveler and he's not going to remain in town overnight. At the very least, you have to give him an amount of bread where he'll be able to have enough to get 2 meals. Okay, this is a way to try to calculate where he's getting enough, even in a time of devaluation of currency, that he's going to get enough for 2 meals out of this. Or he can go and he can sell it, or he can use it. But we were talking before in the last halacha, in halacha 5, about the price of bread. Inside of there can also be the expense incurred by the baker to grind the wheat, bake the bread, and to process it, and that after you come in and you're putting in these deductions for a third of loss, and a third for the time, and a third for baking, that what's left when he goes and he sells it has to be able to buy him at least 2 meals. Okay, and that another point about using the terminology this way is going to be such where that even if you're having price fluctuations in the value of currency and what can be purchased, that this ratio of what comes left after you sell it remains in place. So that even in the case where the Romans are coming and melting down the money and stealing the silver out of the money, that you're still going to be left in a way where the poor people in this kind of event are still going to be able to get 2 meals a day. And when you're talking about them staying overnight, that you have to give them lodging as well as the 2 meals so they can spend the night in town, not only with food, but you have to get them a place to sleep with a bed and bedding, and you can't just stick them out overnight. The Rosh adds that when somebody stays overnight, he is given an additional allotment of oil and beans to eat with the bread. So that's going to be from a Tosefta, and that's how we know this. So that when you're saying, okay, the bread is this, and the lodgings are that, what you're trying to describe is you're trying to describe this extra amount that's not only for the bed with bedding, but also the oil and beans, so that the guy can really be satisfied for the day. He just doesn't get a piece of bread. And that's why you're putting in provisions for the night. It's referring to this other Tosefta, which has this extra amount. And then on Shabbos, you're giving food for 3 meals. And why would that be? Because, this is talking about, in addition to, the bread that we talked about, and in addition to the night lodging, you're really supposed to give him, from another Tosefta, enough where you're adding fish and vegetables. And this term loaf is talking really about a weekday, and then food for 3 meals is talking about an upgraded thing where he's not just getting bread, but he's also getting fish and vegetables to honor the Sabbath. Now you can find this in Peah Tosefta 4:8, where you're seeing that it's going to add, the beans and oil. It's going to add the fish and vegetables for Shabbat. So really, you have a description here that's talking about the normal weekday, and then you're talking about if he stays overnight, how it is, and that's going to be added for bedding, and so it's going to be indoors, right? And it's going to be in something that's going to be safe and warm and dry, and it's going to be where he has bedding, and he has an extra measure of oil and beans. Okay, that's not described in the first part of this Mishnah about just getting a loaf of bread. And then on Shabbat, he's getting extra provisions for kavod of Shabbos. And so it's describing really three different conditions. One is a regular meal, one regular weekday, one is staying overnight, and one is going to be on Shabbos. And that it's really going to be three different types of food that's given. And the Mishnah now is going to discuss two types of charity funds, okay? So the Mishnah says, whoever has enough food for 2 meals may not take from the tamhoi. Why would that be? Let me just explain real quick. So the tamhoi, that's going to be distributed every day. So basically, there's no reason for the tamhoi. It's like a soup kitchen or something, right? So there's no reason for the tamhoi to spend the money to give you for tomorrow, because it's giving you for today, and it's just required to give you for today. So that, if you don't have enough for 2 meals, that's going to make sure that you have enough to sustain you for 2 meals for the day. If you're poor, and it's not going to give you extra money because it's not obligated to. It doesn't have to, because you can come back tomorrow to the tamhoi, to the soup kitchen, and come get it. So why give you extra money, right? Doesn't make sense. So that makes a lot of sense why it would just be limited for only 2 meals, because it's looking at how the tamhoi is working. Now, the Mishnah says if he has enough food for 14 meals, he may not take for the kupa. The kupa is collected by 2 officials and distributed by 3. So the way the kupa works is like this: that the kupa provides meals for 14 days for a poor person. That's basically a week, and that's going to be distributed every Friday. And if a poor person already has money from a kupa, he can't go to another kupa to collect it, because he already has a week's worth of meals. And if he has a week's worth of meals, he's not eligible to be helped by the kupa fund. So, if a person does not have food for Saturday or Malva Malka, that person can get help to fund it. But the point is that he has enough food for 14 meals. Let's say he's short a little bit of food for the Malva Malka. He can go to the chuppah to get a little bit of extra to make sure he has for Malva Malka. But if he basically has 14, he's not eligible to go collect, 3 days later, so that he has, 17 meals. He's not allowed to do that. Okay, the chuppah doesn't have an obligation to go do that. Again, we're talking about minimums, right? So the kupa is going to be run in a way where it's going to make sure that whoever's coming now has the money now, and didn't give to a poor person now for 3 weeks from now. That you're giving for now, and that that you're saving money for other poor people who might also need it now. That's really the point. So when you have people coming and collecting for food for poor people, you have to be very careful about that too, because the tradition here is that you're giving for, like a week. You're not giving more than that, because you're taking away from your ability to help another poor person that comes to you now that might also need. So that's the logic of what's happening here. And why would this be collected by 2 and then distributed by 3? Very simple, right? Because when you have adjudications about money issues with judges or things like that, that's going to be done where you have you have to have 3 judges to handle a money issue. So basically, they're coming, and you have 3 people who are basically acting like judges, saying, "Do you have enough food for a week?" And he'll say, "I have enough food, Mr. Kupa Fund, for 3 days." And then the Kupa Fund will say, "Fine, here's 4 days, so now you have a week. Goodbye." And so basically, that's a monetary judgment. You need 3 people. That's why it's 3. So you say, why do you need 2? Why do you need to collect with 2 officials? And the reason why is because you need 2 men for monetary issues to be a witness. So you have basically 2 witnesses, kosher halachic witnesses, that can prove that that would be able to testify that they received the money and that they have the funds. And that's why it's collected by 2 and distributed by 3. Now the Gemara talks about it like this. It says that the tamchoy is distributed each day, and the chuppah is distributed each Friday. The Gemara continues, says the tamchoy is distributed to any poor person, and the chuppah is distributed only to the poor of that city. Again, there's a whole case in the Das Torah about giving to the person that is closest to you, and community is part of that. So now the Gemara is going to address the Mishnah, which read the kuppah is collected by 2 officials and distributed by 3. And now the Gemara wants to know how many administrators are needed for the tamchoy fund. So what about that? The Rabbi Huna said the tamchoy is collected by 3 administrators because it is distributed immediately. In other words, just like money issues are with 3 judges, because the tamchoy is collecting and distributing at the same time, that you need to have 3 people there, because it's not waiting for a week to do it. It's doing it now. So there might be a poor person that comes 2 minutes later to come collect from it. You need 3 people to give it out. And that's why it's going to be collected by 3, because the process of how the tamchoy is working is giving it out, consistently, and collecting consistently, so that it doesn't have like a week to wait to do it. That maybe, it doesn't need to collect for a couple of days and then distribute it all in one day. It's being distributed consistently. And that's why, again, you need the 3 judges to give it out. You have the 3 judges determining if the person's poor, if he's worthy, and if he has enough for 2 meals. But if he has more, then it's a monetary issue, right? He'll say, well, you have enough for 5 days. You don't need extra meals. So that's a monetary judgment that would be taken away from the community charity fund, and that's why it's given with 3. So the Gemara now is going to talk about why 3 administrators are needed for both the kuppah fund and the tamchoy. And Rabbi Chelbo says in the name of Rabbi Ba Bar Zavda, we do not appoint less than 3 administrators to distribute communal charity funds. And I see to derive this as follows: if monetary cases must be adjudicated by 3 judges, should capital cases not certainly require that amount? In other words, since what it's saying is, since the very lives of the poor are dependent upon charity funds, you're going to have 3 officials needed for that function. In other words, what he's trying to say is that, these are pekuach nefesh cases where they're so poor that if the officials don't give them enough support, maybe it's like they're spilling the blood of the poor person, or the poor person might die on their account. So again, you have for life and death cases with judges 23. So the lower cases are going to be monetary, right? So you need 3. And so because this could be a pekuach nefesh thing, and because it's a monetary thing to make sure that the blood is not spilt, you need judges. And in order to administrate it correctly, you need to have 3 judges, and because it's a monetary issue, and that's how. So the Gemara counters says, well, then there should be 23 administrators, because that's the number of judges for capital cases. So they says, well, why not have, it's asking, well, why not have 23 judges for the communal funds? And the Gemara says, until one gathers them together, his life can be endangered, and therefore only 3 administrators are needed to distribute the funds. In other words, that there are incidences of poor people that died while waiting for food, and so to help speed up the process, you can't have one person do it. You can't have 2 people do it. You got to have, again, allocation and judging and listening to a case. Well, that by Halacha and Masechet Sanhedrin, all monetary issues are by 3 judges. And so this is not a pekuach nefesh issue yet. This is a monetary issue, so it doesn't become a pekuach nefesh issue. So the Gemara is gonna talk about the disqualification of the charity administrator, and it says, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, we do not appoint 2 brothers among 3 charity administrators. Why would that be? Because it's also like when you're appointing judges, the judges are not allowed to be related. and any relative is not a valid uh, for a judgment and is not a valid for a witness. So basically what Rabbi Yossi is saying is that because this is like a judgment where they're determining a monetary issue, it's going to be the same case here where the brothers are not going to be allowed because they're related. It's conflict of interest. Gemara doesn't allow. The halacha doesn't allow it. Now we're going to get into things about this position of administrator and how to administer charity, the right way to administer charity. And we're going to see how the sages set this up for communities, but implicit in this is what you as a person should be doing as somebody who's giving out tzedakah or giving out their meiser, and how you should be handling it in your personal life. There's a lot of clues here for behavior and your obligation. I was listening to chapter 8, Halacha 5, while I was cooking breakfast this morning, and I was reviewing the shiur just to review it, and my wife was just, I guess, heard it in the background while I was cooking her breakfast while she got ready for work, and she said, "Wait a second, what do you mean about this guy in Sfat who's really an Arab? What are you supposed to do? Not give anybody charity?" And that really ties into this point of where we're going, that you really have an obligation to investigate who is coming to you for charity, what that cause is going for, because my wife's question was, wait a second, you mean if you give to a wrong charity, you get no credit in Shemayim? And there's a Gemara that says that. There is a Gemara that says that, and so that if you want to get credit for your charity, you have to be diligent at it, because if you give to something where they trick you, it's like you didn't give the charity. I know that your intention is there, but there's something special about the charity where it has to be real for it to count. And the other thing that's important about that is to say that, yeah, okay, give somebody a small something, and that's okay. But if you're going to give a large amount or something even starting to get to be substantial, I would, for example, put the limit at somewhere like $10 or $20 or something, something more than that, where you don't feel it and it's not, a pinch in your pocket. You should really start to have a limit where you start to really do investigate it. I can tell you a story that I know is true. I know the rabbi in Florida, that there was a group that did one of these, raise money quickly, this guy is sick, and this guy has whatever, and we need to raise this in this period of time, a religious Haredi thing, and a bunch of people started to call the rabbi to ask, hey, is this a real thing? Because this was the rabbi's neighbor. The rabbi didn't know and went and asked the guy who they were raising money for. Turns out the guy was not sick. There was just something wrong with the wife, where, I don't know, she was crazy or whatever. And, this was a Haredi charity. And, you have to really check things. And that's why the administrators here, they're appointing 3 to be in charge of the kuppah or the tamchoi, because you're giving out. These are matters of life and death, and you need to be responsible. You can't just write checks and hand them off and not know how the money is used. A lot of times with these charities, the money will be used just to do administrative expenses and salaries, and the amount of money that actually goes to helping the people is very, very small. Another thing that you should know is that that you get a special status when you're giving money to do kiruv for Jews. So that's something that you might want to prioritize in your personal life, for giving to real movements that are real and legitimate, and that you can see is doing something with an involvement of kiruv for getting Jews to come back to doing things like keeping Shabbat, learning Torah, learning the laws, learning what it is to be a Jew, learning what it is to be a human being. The Gemara was just talking about with not being able to appoint two brothers. And why? Because we can't have conflicts of interest. And now an amazing related incident is going to come up in this Gemara. Rabbi Yossi removed one of two brothers from his position as the administrator of the Kupa or the Tamchoi, one of the public charity administrators. And Rabbi Yossi came forward and explained before the whole population of the city why he took this action. And he said, no iniquity, nothing bad was found in the person. Rather, he was removed because we do not appoint two brothers as administrators. So what he's saying is look, there was nothing untrustworthy about this person, but whoever was in charge of this charity appointed two brothers, and it's against halacha to have two brothers. Now, I'm the sage of this area. I have to take this off because, you can't appoint this. It's very nice that these are upstanding people, but as a matter of practice, with everything in Torah law, you're not allowed to have two relatives to be judges or to be witnesses to something like that. And you can't have a conflict of interest where, they're sort of on the same side with close family. It doesn't count. It doesn't count for witnessing or for judging. And so Rabbi Yossi gets up in front of everybody so that there's no like suffix or question on this person. It's not an embarrassment for the person. And he says, basically, look, I'm fixing a mistake that was made by the people who appointed this charity in the city. They didn't know any better. And it's against the halacha. You're not allowed to have two brothers on. And that's why I'm removing him. But I'm not taking him off because he's crooked. So that's a deep point. And we can learn from this where you have to be very careful to protect the reputation of a Jew. And you see that it's this kind of derech eretz. And, it's also important because, you want the charity to function and you don't want other people who are more learned to come along and say, you got two brothers here, maybe they're stealing. You have two brothers here, maybe they're doing something where they're giving the charity in a funny way because you've already started with this funny thing with two brothers. So he's clearing it up to the population. And in the same way, he's actually teaching them where he's saying, look, you appointed this, but this is not a proper appointment. But there's nothing wrong with this guy. And I'm not removing him because there's something wrong with the guy. I'm removing him because he can't have two brothers. It's a very deep story. Now, we're going to get into the appointment of charity administrators. Now, notice this, right? In the halacha and in the Gemara and the sages, and in setting up a city charity, you're having administrators who have to not be related. They have to be like judges in monetary matters. Okay, they have to consider and weigh where the money is going on a case-by-case basis. That's why you're having three judges, because it's like a monetary matter. And that is pointing to this legacy of saying, hey, you in your life, if you're going to be writing a check or giving more, don't just give it to somebody who tells you a nice story. You're not allowed to do it. You need to be like a judge to determine where that money is going and what it's being used for. If you're giving it to a yeshiva, ask the yeshiva, are you buying books with this? Are you fixing the dorms with this? Are you, how are you using this money? The brisk yeshiva, if somebody is not worthy, but they investigate the person when they take money, they'll say, hey, who are you? What blah blah blah, and try to figure out who the person is. And if the person is not a very good character or maybe doesn't keep Shabbat, they'll use the money to buy toilet paper. Something that's not going to be connected to buying books, something that's not going to be connected to scholarships for people to learn. But you, as a responsible Jew, have to come and learn about what your money is being used for, where it's going, and investigate it carefully. Because again, there's Gemaras that point that you do not get credit for that charity if that money was given to a thief. And sometimes it says that Hashem will actually send thieves to diminish the amount of charity that you give, because charity is so powerful in helping you and in helping your case and helping you to make tshuva and helping as part of fixing. And that if you're really not worthy, you're going to be encouraged. There's going to be lots of thieves that are sent to you, and the charity that you think you gave, you really didn't give. So when you get to Shemayim, you're going to say, but I gave all this charity. And you're going to say, nah, you really didn't give as much as you thought because you didn't investigate. You need to be like what these guys are saying. You need to investigate very carefully. Now, they're going to talk about the appointment of the charity administrators, and Rabbi Yosei went to Kafra, that's a city, and he wished to appoint charity administrators over the people of the city, but no one accepted the appointments upon themselves. So these basically, says Amara Fulda, is saying that they were unwilling to take the position of authority, either because they were out of humility. In other words, they didn't want to, they were such refined people that they didn't want to take positions over other people, or out of fear that they would abuse their power and be liable to heavenly retribution. So Rabbi Yossi goes up, says the Gemara, and said to them, a Mishnah listing the various officials in the temple states, Ben Bivi presided over the wicks. Now, if this one, Ben Bivi, who was appointed over something as seemingly insignificant as adjusting the thickness of the wicks, merited to be counted among the great men of the generations, you, who are being appointed over people's lives, is it not certain that you merit to be exceedingly great? So what he's trying to say is he's trying to pull a story from Shekalim, where they listed a lot of the temple, the people who were in charge of different roles in the temple. What is the role of a guy who rolls the wick? This is where you have the menorah stays the same size. The cups of the menorah is the same size. But we know that, June 22nd is going to have a different number of light hours in the day versus December 24th or December 20th. It's going to have a different number of light hours in the day. So without changing the cups, the only way that they could make sure that the light stayed for the period of time was that they would make the wick either thinner or wider so that it would draw oil in a way where it would stay light for that correct amount of time. One of the clevernesses of the Das Torah and the tradition. So Ben Bivi was in charge of rolling the wick, but they picked somebody who was great stature, somebody who was a man of the one of the great men of the generation. These are people that were important leaders, and by the way, also included that list is Pesachia, who the Mishnah identifies as Mordechai from the story of Purim. And so you have these really great men that are doing these things. And what's amazing about it is they're saying, look, this looks so insignificant, okay? But Ben Bivi is being listed together with great leaders over other very important functions of the temple. Certainly, the wick size might not look that important as like other functions of the temple, like opening the temple every day, but in fact, it's very important. And in fact, even though it doesn't look like it, you have to look at the merit of the people themselves, and that they're being put on with a leadership position, and that it's really, says Rabbi Yossi, a credit to you that you're being to come to this position that is worthwhile, and this position that, yes, it has risk, but you're determining the ability of somebody to live and die, and you are going to get a lot of credit for that in Shemayim because you're taking on responsibility, and you're going to get all sorts of reward for it. Don't not take the position because you're too humble. Don't not take the position because you're afraid maybe you're going to sin, but get up and do something and take a role and be active because of look at all the positive merit you get, and that you're, to the contrary, you're being asked to do it like Ben Bibi because you are a great man, you are a great person, you are able to do this stuff. So there's a power to getting involved and to trying to better the world and not to run away from it. And if you feel temptation maybe to not be so honest with the money, it's on you to refine yourself and fix yourself and learn more Torah so that you understand, and you get your Yirat Shamayim up, and that you can better yourself. And the Gemara now is going to talk about one of the practices of the Amorim. It says when Rabbi Chagai would appoint administrators, he would have the administrators hold the Torah scroll to indicate that all authority that is granted through the Torah. As is written, through me, the Torah, kings will reign, and through me, officers will rule, which Rabbi Chia Barba interpreted as meaning the Torah sustains leaders. So Pnei Moshe is saying that, in compliance with the verse, Rabbi Chia Barba, who was a Torah scholar, would appoint the community officers, and that he was basically having them hold a Torah so that they would understand where their relationship lies. And the Vilna Goan, when his insight is that when he would have the administrators hold a Torah scroll, the Vilna Goan is explaining that he would actually test them on their proficiency in Torah, and that's what it means, that Rabbi Chagai was only appointing Torah scholars. And we see that today. We see that the seriousness of Torah scholars being in charge and involved with monetary things is so important, and things that are related to matters of life and death are so important. And we even see this in public life here in Israel as well. We see a lot of corruption coming in financial areas when you have people that are not learned in Torah, and you're seeing huge breaches of public trust, where huge amounts of money will be effectively stolen or directed to friends and things like that. And these are people that are appointed because they're not necessarily because they're skillful, but because they're big in this party, and they're a loyalist in this party, and they support the leader of this party. And a lot of times these people have no Yirat Shamayim. A lot of the times these people are not learned in Torah, and they're being put in charge of financial matters. And what Rabbi Chagai was doing was he was actually trying to test these people, or have them hold a Torah scroll while they're accepting this authority. And what this is trying to do is trying to test and check and reaffirm the person's Yirat Shamayim, because a person with Yirat Shamayim understands that everything he does will be counted, and every sin he makes will be met measure for measure, and that he'll be more careful because he knows that, hey, look, there's no perfect person, there's no perfect system, but that Rabbi Chagai was trying to do this to as a way to help minimize risk, putting people on who are very connected to Torah learning, Torah law, observance, and that these people will be able to control themselves better, not only with their midah, but also because they'll choose to do the right actions more of the time than a guy who is really not connected to anything except what he or she thinks is good at that time. So the Gemara is going to now talk about an incident that occurred with a charity administrator. And Rabbi Lezer was a charity administrator. This is going to be the Amorah. And one time when he came home, he asked the members of his household, "What did you do in my absence?" And they said to him, a group of poor people came, and they ate and they drank in recognition of your kindness, and they prayed for your well-being. And Rabbi Eliezer said to them, there is no good reward for that. In other words, what he's saying is, since he received honor for his efforts, he's not going to receive abundant reward in Shemayim. So then the story in the Gemara continues. It says, another time when he came home, he asked them, what did you do in my absence? And they said to him, a different group of poor people came, and they ate and they drank, and then they belittled you. And he said to them, now there is good reward. So basically what the Pnei Moshe says here is that a charity administrator should not feel discouraged if he suffers degradation, for he will ultimately receive a generous reward in Shemayim for his unappreciated efforts. Now, there's another thing that's important here. You, as the charity administrator, are not responsible to make another person rich. Your job is just to help them to not have suffering and to get enough. But your job is not to make them rich. And there's another Gemara elsewhere there's a Gemara in a sugya in Kodshim, where in the Seder of Kodshim, where it's saying that if somebody is not appreciative of your efforts in trying to help them and doesn't appreciate it, you're no longer obligated to help them. So let's say you try to give somebody 5 shekels and they turn it away. They say, sorry, this is not enough money. I want more. Well, you're not obligated to help somebody anymore once they don't appreciate what you've done. And another thing to keep in mind is, when somebody's coming door to door, okay, yes, you should give them something. You have to give them something small. But what we were learning was that, look, you're also supposed to look at what is the total amount that they're going to collect from this effort of going door to door, and that the amount that you give should be sized to that, regardless of the story they tell you, because again, you can't investigate every story. Now, this is really trying to incentivize it so that if you're going to be giving to a community charity box, like one that's run by a community rabbi, that's something that you can give more money to. That's something that you probably should look at investing in, because that's something that the community rabbi, he's going to check on a case-by-case basis, and he's also going to know that he's not supposed to give away all the money to one person, because what happens when the next person comes? And that's kind of what Rabbi Eliezer's story is kind of showing us, is that, look, you're not supposed to give so much that the people are celebrating. It's just enough to get by. It's just enough to get your needs met. That's it. And now we're going to get into other cases about what happens if there's somebody rich or somebody who has something that is more necessary. Then we're going to get into that. The case is a little bit nuanced, but as a basic thing, if you're living in an apartment building and you have a guy collecting, and okay, you give him a couple of shekels, fine, and then okay, well, there's 50 other people that he's going to go knock on the door for, and they're all going to give him a few shekels, and he's going to end up with $30, $40, which okay, he's doing this for an hour, it's like $40 an hour. Okay, fine, he can definitely get more than a couple of meals out of that, and you've done your share, you've done your thing, you're fine in Shemayim. Again, you're not supposed to go make somebody rich from giving away tzedakah. That's not the point of it. And the problem that you get is that you're also taking away from the next guy who comes. So that's why you got to be very careful. And I recommend that by your door, if you're living in a Haredi neighborhood, that whenever you're getting your tzedakah change, because when you're giving tzedakah, when you're taking out meiser, you always have change. You take your change, you put it by the door. When somebody comes, you use that change to give, and that generally you're trying to take your bills and you're trying to use that for causes that are more easy for you to identify and easier for you to investigate. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about a related incident. And by the way, if people are cursing you for not giving enough charity, like what Rabbi Lazer said when these people came back, look, if you're giving the charity according to Halacha and they're unhappy with it, hey, look, you're still getting a big reward in Shemayim. Okay, the problem is on them for not being grateful, and or maybe they didn't learn enough to know that you're not really supposed to get rich on charity, giving and collecting charity. That's not the point of it. It's really a thing of just getting enough to have your needs to be sustained. And when it starts to become like a job where you have some people that like there's a lady that collects by the wall who's married off all her kids and bought them apartments, and she does it every day because she's addicted to it. And I know this because she's my mother-in-law knows her very, very well. It's really like, it's not really the point of it, right? It's really like you're supposed to give enough to a person that it's like they would be going to a soup kitchen or something, okay? And you're not obligated in charity to go support their standard of living for them to be able to marry off their kids, get a car, and pay for all the kids' weddings and apartments. That's not tzedakah, okay? But if you have some people that came and they wanted some a couple of falafel sandwiches, and you gave them some money for some falafel sandwiches, that's okay. And when you have all your bills collected for your tzedakah and you want to go give it to Esha Torah, or you want to go give it to Dvar Yerushalayim, or you want to go give it to a kiruv rabbi like Rabbi Rubin in Florida, or you want to go give it to somebody else, like Zamir Cohn and his organization doing kiruv in Israel, great, no problem. You know where the money's going. You know how the money's going to be used. That's great. But on a case-by-case basis, even if they're going to belittle you for the amount that you're giving, you're still getting a good reward. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about a related incident. And they said that they wanted to appoint Rabbi Akiva as the charity administrator. And he said to them, allow me to consult with my householder. That's going to literally be his wife. And basically out of respect for his wife and his family, he wanted to accept the advice of the wife before accepting the position. Now, you can see that that's good derech eretz. Before you're going to do something big in your life, you want to talk to your wife about it and get her input. And a lot of times she'll see things that you don't see, and a lot of times it'll keep you out of trouble or from making mistakes. So we see good derech eretz by Rabbi Akiva, and that's good advice for us as well. So Rabbi Akiva gets this offer to become the city charity administrator, and he says, let me consult with my wife first. And they followed him and heard his voice saying that he is considering the position with the consent to be belittled, with the consent to be shamed. So the Mara Fulda says like this. He says that Rabbi Akiva was advised by his family not to accept the position because inevitably he's going to be disappointing people, and that people are going to abuse him and condemn him. And Rabbi Akiva responded that it is worthwhile accepting the position for just those cases because the abuse also brings heavenly reward. So when you're giving charity and you're giving a couple of shekels and somebody is upset with you because you didn't give enough, you did your part and you're getting extra reward when you are shamed or belittled. And again, your job is not to go and make that other person rich or to make him even happy. Your job is to make sure that a Jew comes to you, you're giving him something, but when you have your bigger amount of money and you're giving that to a cause that is investigated, that is the key. That is the distinction of how this is supposed to work. And do not be intimidated when people are saying that you didn't give me enough, get out of here, can't you give more? You actually did what you were supposed to do, and you're being responsible. Because again, there's risk, right? You don't know this person. This might just be a guy who's gonna, you know, do what happened to me, where he was claiming to raise money for yeshiva, and he was actually a crook. Now I know that this guy was a crook because I complained about him to a rabbi in Brooklyn, and the rabbi in Brooklyn knew this guy and said that the Bet Din issued a warning against him in New York. The Bet Din in New York issued a warning against this guy. I didn't know that, and the guy is obviously a well-known scam artist, and the Bet Din issued a warning, and a lot of the people in New York and in Brooklyn know this guy, and okay, he conned me out of money. But that's why people come and ask to give. You give a little bit, but if you're really going to give a good amount, you need to investigate. I can't stress it enough. And when people come and complain to you, you didn't give me enough, your obligation is not to make them happy. Your obligation is just to satisfy this, check this box in Shemayim that you gave something, that, Hashem is gracious with you and you're gracious with another person. But your job is not to make them rich. Your job is not to make them happy. Your job is just to check that box and to take the other money that you do have, and that's what you're really, going to focus on. So the Gemara is going to present a dispute regarding, when we investigate the authenticity of a person's claim that he's needed. So Rabbi Bob Bar Zavda said, the following issue is the subject of a dispute between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. One said that we investigate the eligibility of someone who requests clothing, but we do not investigate the eligibility of someone who requests sustenance. So you have two cases, okay? You have a case that somebody comes along and says he needs food, and we're going to give that to him immediately because food does sustain life. You are supposed to care about the body of your fellow Jew, and even more than worrying about his soul, you're supposed to help make sure that his body is okay. And there are cases where people delayed in giving charity for food and the person died. So you give them enough, you give them a little bit. And by the way, I just want to point out that if you're giving somebody 10 shekels, there's a lot of falafel stores in Jerusalem that sell falafel for 5 shekels, and literally that's 2 meals, right? Because you're washing on your falafel with pita, and you're literally giving somebody enough where they're going to have 2 meals in a day with 10 shekels. So, with sustenance, you're not, you're going to you got to give them something. You got to help them out, okay? But now they're talking about a case, but what happens when they're coming for clothing? Now we're getting into something much bigger, right? So the Gemara is going to say, but we do not investigate the eligibility of sustenance. And the other one said that we do not even investigate the eligibility of one who requests clothing in order to avoid disgrace to a member of the covenant of Abraham. Now, we need to be very, very careful when we're giving tzedakah to do it in a modest way, because you don't want to cause a person to have shame, and you don't want to disgrace the descendant of Abraham, and you don't want to cause a descendant of Abraham and a fellow Jew to have shame. So what the Yefei Mara is pointing out about this is that therefore we provide him with clothing immediately, even though that we're well aware that he may have the means to provide himself, and he could be taking advantage of our generosity. And the other case, they're saying that in these bigger things that are not life-threatening issues, that you're supposed to come ahead and investigate it before giving it. Now, with cases where there could be danger of starvation, and definitely with life-threatening issues like food, you're not gonna delay. But in these bigger cases like clothing, you need to investigate it. That's one opinion. And the Gemara is going to disapprove of this second view about not shaming the descendant of Abraham, right, for this bigger claim, right? Because we are worried about fraudsters coming and taking advantage of us and our good natures. So The Gemara is going to try to disprove it, and the Baraisa disputes the one who said that we do not even investigate the one who requires or requests clothing. And there's a note by the Mara Fulda that after listing the entitlements of the poor, like the number of additional gifts, when we're not familiar with someone, uh, you know, there's going to be a question. But if we are familiar with the person, then you're going to go ahead and clothe him, so that if somebody is coming, you know, and he's requesting clothes, and if you're familiar with the person, you can clothe them. That's the point of this. But if somebody just comes along stom and asks for it, it's not the same case as somebody who's coming and asking for food. And sometimes when you're on the street, you'll see that. You'll see a guy who's asking for money for a bus, or he says he lost his bus card, okay? And, usually when you give them, the 20 shekels, you'll see them going and buying cigarettes or buying a beer. And then there'll be a case where a guy just comes up and says, look, I need all day. I'm hungry. Can you buy me a sandwich? That's a different story. The Gemara is going to answer this question about, whether, we're going to not investigate on the clothing. And the Gemara answers, says, interpret the Brisa as referring to giving him clothing according to his claimed stature. So what this is trying to say is it's trying to say that if somebody comes unclothed, we are going to provide him with the basic clothing without a delay. But, says the Mara Fulda, if he comes requesting higher quality clothing, we investigate his true stature before giving him that clothing. And when giving charity to someone who has become poor, we're required to supply him based on his previous standard of living. And that, by the way, is Doraita. That's going to be from Devarim 15:8, where the Torah is going to instruct us to provide a poor person the extent of his needs, whatever is lacking for him. So in other words, he has to be given clothing and he has to be given food to come up with his previous financial status, because again, we're trying to limit his suffering. And he might have lost all his money, and he might be, not just grieving because he lost his money, but he's also grieving because his previous, standard of living can't be attained, and he's just in the dumps. And it's a miserable, miserable feeling, and it's something that really permeates a poor person's feeling thoroughly, where they even, dream about it, and that the Jew is supposed to come and help them to get back up on their feet. But what this is trying to show is that, yes, you can be giving clothing and food to conform with your earlier financial status, but that status and the identity of the person has to be investigated before providing him with finer clothing or with finer food and with help. You have to investigate. You can't just give away. Again, your obligation is not to make somebody rich, but there is an obligation if somebody who was very rich and an aristocrat fell down to being a homeless beggar. You're supposed to do what you can to, get them nicer wine, nicer food, nicer clothing, but you need to investigate it. You can't just give it to them based on a story, because this is what the Talmud says. The Talmud is saying that you need to investigate on these things. Now the Gemara supports the answer by citing a brisa where this is actually going to be stated specifically. And the brisa taught that explicitly, when are these words that a poor person is provided only with his other needs and not with clothing stated? It says, when we are not familiar with him, but when we are familiar with him, we clothe him, and it all depends upon his stature. In other words, that the concluding words of the Brisa clearly state, says the Mara Fulda, that the need to be familiar with the poor person applies only with regards to giving him clothing according to his stature. In other words, what this is saying is that we clothe him according to the stature of what he had, only after we investigate his true needs. And the final clause of the Brisa supports the Gemara's previous answer, which was that, that he is given clothing according to his stature. But again, this is with investigation, and this is trying to teach you that, okay, a guy comes, knocks on the door, asks for a couple of shekels, give him a couple of shekels, no problem. If the guy's coming with a story that he needs money for IVF and he can't have kids and he blah, 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 okay, investigate it. If you want to help him, investigate it. First of all, there are organizations that will help him, like B'nai Olam, and they will give him financial support. And maybe what you want to do is you want to, instead of giving to that guy, you want to say that, I'm going to give to B'nai Olam, and what's your name? And I'm going to ask them to earmark this for you. And then what can happen is the guy, if he's a real patient, B'nai Olam is going to know his case. They're going to know what's going on. They're going to know how much money he needs. They don't know what, you don't know what, you're not a doctor. You don't know what treatment he needs and how much it's going to cost. But B'nai Olam does. And so you can say, no problem, I'm going to help you with your IVF. Give me your name. Here's the number of the rabbi at B'nai Olam. And I'm going to put the money into B'nai Olam, and to the extent you need it, I'll give it to you. And if you don't need all of it, then it'll go to someone else. And if the guy is a con artist and he doesn't need it at all, when he goes to B'nai Olam, they're gonna see right away that there's no medical records, he's not even married, whatever. And in that case, instead of this guy, they're going to give it to another person who's a real person who actually does need the tzedakah for IVF. That's another way to handle it. But that's a way where it's done, where in every way it would be investigated and you wouldn't blow your tzedakah money. That's the key point, is to make sure that you're getting the full maximum amount for your tzedakah money in Shemayim and in this world, and that you're not just giving to con artists. So there's another Baraisa that taught, for food we wait 30 days, and for clothing 6 months. It is thus apparent that we investigate before distributing clothing. So what this is trying to do, says the Marafulda, is the Gemara understands that the purpose of the wait is to allow enough time to verify a person's true status. And this Baraisa is saying that, this refers to providing him with the clothing according to his stature. And if there's, there's no investigation needed for ordinary clothing, but the Baraisa is differentiating with somebody who's at a higher status, so that it's saying that, don't just go ahead and look for 2 minutes and be like, oh, okay. It's saying that, you really should be taking your time. In other words, if somebody's coming along and saying that I was very rich and I want to have nicer wine and whiskey and duck meat, which, by the way, is very similar to a case of a poor person in a Gemara, that you do investigate it. But the investigation for something like that for somebody's true needs, that can be up to 30 days. That's not a 5-minute, hi, quick, what's going on? Oh, okay, seems good to me. No. It's really doing your due diligence, and it's trying to show you have a due diligence. That's just on the finer food. But on the finer clothing, it can be up to even 6 months. So, in other words, it's saying that, you need to really be putting in, a sincere amount of investigation. In other words, how much investigation? And again, up to, if he's coming to claim he's rich and he wants nicer food, it's up to like 30 days of investigation. You're supposed to be very thorough in it. It's not a chick-chack thing. And that if he's coming for more things, saying something more substantial like clothing, it's supposed to be more. Now, you might have a case where somebody's coming and asking for help with his business, and that I was poor, I'm trying to get back on my feet for business, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's not a one conversation thing. You're supposed to really investigate it. So it's supposed to be like, maybe like 6 months amount of time for investigation, not just a quick, hello, how are you? What's going on? Oh, really? That's a sad story. Okay, here's money, goodbye. So the Gemara is now going to, is going to refine this. And it's going to say, interpret it as referring to how long a person must be in a city in order to be required to contribute to these funds. In other words, what it's saying is that it's not addressing when the poor is eligible to receive the funds. So that's a wrinkle in the sort of like the last way to look at this Baraisa. And so what this is trying to say, says the Mara Fulda, is that when somebody lived in a city for 30 days, he must contribute to the communal kupa, and if the city has a clothing fund, he is not required to contribute until he's been in the city for 6 months. So since the need for clothing is relatively uncommon, it was only necessary to collect for those who lived in a city for longer than that amount of time. Now, this is another way, to look at it, to be like, look, if you're living in a city for at least 30 days, you, as part of your charity, should start contributing to the rabbi's charity fund. Assuming, he's an Orthodox Haredi rabbi, you should not be giving money to a Reform or conservative rabbi because they don't really follow the Halacha, and they're not going to give out the charity in a halachically correct way. So you find a Haredi Orthodox rabbi that's reputable and a real community fund, and you give to that. And after 30 days, you should be contributing to that. And then there'll be another gamak that will be something like helping, poor people with clothing. You should give to that as well. That's another way to say. Now, the Baraisa taught for food, we wait 30 days. And for taxes and communal charities, we wait 12 months. So the Baraisa, which set the amount of time that we have to live in a city, as it's setting it to say no, 12 months, and that's going to be contributions of charity. And so the Gemara continues, says the previous Baraisa, which sets the amount of time that one must live in a city as 6 months, must be addressing the amount of time that one must live in a city in order to be able to take charity. That's really what it's asking. In other words, it's saying that if you've been in the city for 30 days as a poor person, can you start collecting the charity after 30 days as a member of that city? And if you've been living there 6 months as a member of that city, can you start to go to the gamak for clothing and start getting help for clothing? And what this other Baraisa is trying to say is it's trying to say that no, for taxes and community charities, you actually are supposed to wait 12 months. In other words, the levy on the inhabitants of the city to cover municipal expenses and the needs to the king, and other things like that for the city gates and things like that. That's going to be when you're paying that when it comes out to be a year. The city's taxes get paid by people who are living in the city for a year, and that the other times, says this Baraisa, is the amount of time before you start to be eligible to get help from the community charity for those kinds of things. Now, the Gemara is going to answer and clear this up. It says the first Baraisa. Now, again, it's just refining it. It's not arguing with it. That's very common with the Yerushalmi. It's not going to sit there and be like the Bavli where he says like this, no, it's wrong because of that, and this. No, a lot of times what will happen is they'll bring in a Baraisa, and then they'll bring another Baraisa, and then you'll see there's no Maloket, and they're both right, but they're both nuanced and talking about a different circumstance. So this is going to be the same kind of case. The Gemara is going to answer and say that the first Baraisa is referring to the amount of time one must live in a city to be required to contribute charity. And the Gemara continues, says, and what is the second Baraisa referring to when it states for taxes and charities 12 months? The Gemara says that the charities mentioned here are not referring to the contributions of clothing and food to the poor. Rather, the Baraisa is dealing with the salary for teachers of Scripture and Mishnah. In other words, what it's trying to say is that someone who has lived in the city for 12 months has to contribute to these funds. And the previous Baraisa is saying that after living in the city for 30 days, somebody has to contribute to the Kupa fund, and after 6 months has to contribute to the clothing fund. But the other fund for the charity of 12 months, that this is going to be for the salary to guarantee the continuity of scripture and the study of Mikra, of the Torah, and also the Mishnah. And so, we have a case where if a father can't pay for the Torah education of his son, the community is required to provide that service. And that is why it is so important when you're living in a community and you've been there for a while to contribute to the Orthodox Haredi local community rabbis charity fund, because a lot of that tzedakah money is going to go to help teach kids for bar mitzvah, or to help teach kids that are younger than that so they can learn Torah. And I will tell you an amazing story, that there was a student by Rav Shach, and the student was taking care of Rav Shach when he was very, very old. And he noticed that Rav Shach did not eat from 8 to 8:30 every day. He ate before 8:30, before 8, he ate after 8:30, but in the hours of 8 to 8:30, he saw that Rav Shach never ate. And everybody knows that Rav Shach was not only a master in the Torah, and in the master of the Gemara and master of all the laws, but he was also a master of Kabbalah. Now, he didn't teach it, but he was a master of it. So the student, saw all these very deep Kabbalah books that he had written and had notes on, and was thoroughly proficient with it. And he went to ask him one day, and he said, why aren't you eating from the hours of 8 to 8:30 every day? Is it a Kabbalah thing? And Rav Shach started to cry and said, no, it's not a Kabbalah thing. We have millions of secular Jews who are going to secular school from 8 to 8:30, where they're going to learn about, how they're from monkeys and everything else. And they're, these schools are destroying the souls. And one of the times the Gemara will say that whole cities will have misfortune and destruction is because the people of the community stop supporting the salary for teachers of scripture and Mishnah. And that's why one of the best charities that you can give in whatever community you're in is to give to the local Haredi Orthodox rabbi for the Kupa fund, where a lot of that is going to help to teach the younger children about the Torah, so that they learn what is Shabbat, what is the Shema, what does it mean to learn Torah, what is the Mishnah, and how are the laws structured. And that's one of the most important things that you can do to give to charity. And, don't be intimidated by people coming with stories to your house and sad because you didn't give him, enough to make him happy. You should run when you're living in a city to make sure that you're giving to the fund by the Orthodox Haredi rabbi for food for people, and for the gemach for clothing for people, and most importantly, to give for the fund to help to pay for the poorer people who can't, who they're not in a financial position to teach their son a Torah education. That the Kupa will step up and help and pay for that, and you can help, and it's so important. Thank you.